Morning, everyone. So, not a good morning today. It's raining. Um, Not good. Where's the sunshine gone? So, we're having a break today from traditional tales for you because you're looking at Guy Fawkes in your People in History. So, we're gonna do a little bit of a story about Guy Fawkes, and obviously, you all know the little nursery rhyme, remember, remember the 5th of November, gunpowder treason and plot. I have no reason why gunpowder treason should never be forgot. So that relates to Guy Fawkes, and it's sung so that people never ever forget the reason why we remember and celebrate the finding out about the gunpowder plot and the stopping of the gunpowder plot. So it's happened on the 5th of November, and it celebrates the day that they found Guy Fawkes about to blow up the Houses of Parliament and kill the members of Parliament that were there, including the King. So here we go. So it doesn't just start on the 5th of November though. So it starts way back when the Catholic Pope wouldn't recognise that England's Henry VIII couldn't separate from Catholicism, so that's the church. And Henry VIII severed ties with the church and made himself the head of the Church of England. So the Protestants are ruling England, and when she died, her cousin, King James I, is on the throne in 1603. So here we go. So James had not been on the throne very long when he started to upset the Catholics within England. And they were not happy with what was going on in terms of the religious element. So going to church, being able to worship their Jesus. And they were getting more and more cross when they were told that their Catholic priests had to leave the country and they weren't allowed to go to them to have mass or to have their services. So a group of noble men and gentlemen, known as the Gunpowder Plotters, led by a man called Robert Catesby, decided that they wanted to end Protestant rule. And that meant that they wanted to get rid of our Protestant king, James I. And that it was going to be the biggest bang in history. They were going to blow up our king and queen, all of the church leaders, all of the noblemen, and both of the Houses of Parliament at the same time, all in one go, with 36 barrels of gunpowder, all placed in one place around the Palace of Westminster. So the Palace of Westminster, if you can imagine it, if you've seen, Big Ben, the big tower with the clock on the top of it, which is Big Ben, that is called the Palace of Westminster. So that whole building is known as the Palace of Westminster. And that's where, when our Houses of Parliament sit, that is actually the given name is the Palace of Westminster. And underneath it, there's lots of tunnels for them all to get in and out of. And they were going to place all of those barrels of gunpowder all around in certain places. So when it blew up spectacularly. Well, the plot was apparently revealed when Catholic Lord Monteagle was sent a private message warning him not to go, because some people were Catholics that were going to go to this opening of the Palace of Westminster, and they didn't want to kill the Catholics, so they didn't want them to go. So they thought, well, you know what we're going to have to do? We're going to have to warn them. We don't want them to go. We don't want them to be hurt or murdered. So we're going to have to say, no, don't you go. So the letter was presented to Robert Cecil, James I's chief minister, and he handed it in. So they knew that this plot was going to take place. So let me find where. So it's believed that Lord Cecil had already known about the plot, and he'd allowed it to continue, allowed the people involved to carry on thinking about it and becoming more involved in it so they could get more and more people arrested. Guy Fawkes was born in 1570 in Yorkshire, and he had been a soldier who had spent quite a few years fighting in Italy, and he had adopted a different name. So whilst we call him Guy, he had also gone by the name as Guido, because he thought that impressed the ladies a bit more. And we know that Guido was arrested in the early hours of the morning of the 5th of November, 1605, in the cellar under the House of Lords, next to the 36 kegs of gunpowder, with a box of matches in his pocket. He was tortured, and whilst he was being tortured, he gave away the names of his co-conspirators, and many of them had were related to a Catholic gentleman called Thomas Percy. Now, Thomas Percy is actually related to our current Duke of Northumberland. The Robert Catesby that I talked of right at the top, he and 3 others of the conspirators were killed by soldiers while they were trying to escape. And 8 other of the remaining conspirators were imprisoned in the Tower of London before being tried by a jury for high treason against the king and queen, and they were executed. And I'm not even going to go into how they were executed. So just give me 2 seconds. So here you go. I found a copy of the letter, and this is what it says. The letter went to Monteagle telling him not to go to the Houses of Parliament that day. It says, "My lord, out of the love I bear to some of your friends." Sorry about my dog in the background. The letter doesn't say that. "Out of the love I bear to some of your friends, I have a care of your preservation. Therefore, I would advise you, as you tender your life, to devise some excuse to shift off your attendance at this Parliament. For God and man have concurred to punish the wickedness of this time. And think not slightly of this advertisement, but retire yourself into your country, where you may expect the event in safety. For though there be no appearance of any stir, yet I say they shall receive a terrible blow this Parliament, and yet they shall not see who hurts them. This counsel is not to be contemned, because it may do you good, and can do you no harm. For the danger is past, as soon as you have burnt the letter, and I hope God will give you the grace to make a good use of it, to you, whose holy protection I commend you." And what we know is that in the first instance, Monteagle viewed the matter as a hoax, intended to prevent him from attending the opening of the session of Parliament. But he deemed the safest course was not to conceal the contents of the letter, and so he went off to Whitehall, which is where the offices of the government are, at the late hour, and submitted the letter to the Earl of Salisbury, which is one of the secretaries of the state, so that they could decide what they were going to do with it. And like I said, Cecil held on to it to try and work out who the other conspirators were. 2 seconds. So the king decided to have the Parliament searched in the cellars, because they used to hire the cellars out. And what they did was they sent a message around that the keeper of the wardrobe which was an actual job in the king's household, was going to go down into the cellar to look for some hangings, which are basically curtains. Look for some hangings that they going to pretend had been lost, and that was going to be the only reason that they were down in the cellar, to see if any of the information that they'd received was true. So they sent somebody down into the cellar at midnight on I think the 31st, I've just read, the 31st of October, and they couldn't see anything. So they decided that they would go down again a couple of days later. So they went down again, and at just over midnight, again, it was the same time as after midnight, just over again after midnight, they found Guy Fawkes, like I just previously said, leaving. So they found him there with some matches, like I said, in the corner. He was just leaving, coming out of the door in the corner. They found him standing with his cloak and boots on, as if he was about to take a journey. He had some matches. But very strangely, which we wouldn't think strange now, he had a watch. He had a small pocket watch. Now, in 1605, pocket watches would have been extremely rare unless you were very, very important or very, very wealthy. And they thought this was very rare, very unusual. So they immediately arrested him and asked him questions and wanted to know why he was there and why he had a pocket watch. So they wanted to talk to him and locked him away and started to question him, but he wouldn't tell them anything other than that he was just out and about. But then they obviously started to torture him. Now, this was 4 o'clock in the morning on the Tuesday, the 5th of November, that they'd found him and found the 36 kegs of gunpowder. And all that he would say was that it was him. He was there to fire the gunpowder exactly 12 hours later. So they had found him 12 hours earlier than when he was supposed to fire the gunpowder. So they had found him at 4 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday, the 5th of November, by the time they arrested him. So they found him a bit earlier, but by the time they got him to Whitehall and found out exactly what he was doing there, it was 4 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday, the 5th of November. And he was supposed to light the gunpowder at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on the 5th of November, exactly 12 hours later. And he refused to give up the people who he was working with. It took them a few days of them questioning him and being nasty to him before he actually gave up the names of the other people. So they escaped. They got further out in the country to a place in Warwickshire, which is some distance away from London, before he had actually given up their name. So they, to begin with, thought that he'd been successful because news wasn't like news is today. So they didn't know that it hadn't gone ahead, that he hadn't actually fired the gunpowder train, it's called, so the train of kegs. They didn't know it hadn't gone ahead at 4 o'clock in the afternoon to start with. So yes, so that's if he hadn't carried a pocket watch, they might have let him go. That's why they arrested him, because he was carrying a silver pocket watch. So there you go. That's your story for today. Tomorrow I will try and find another one. They're very difficult to find. And if not, we will go back to fairy tales for tomorrow. I will see you later. Have a lovely day. Hopefully the rain will stop at some point. Bye-bye.